Time now, your Watch Your Breakfast, is 8:59.
This is BBC News. I'm Geeta Guru-Murthy, live at Downing Street. Boris Johnson insists he will carry on as Prime Minister despite an avalanche of resignations from government and party posts in the last 24 hours. The new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, has called for the Prime Minister to quit. The new Education Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, has resigned.
Very sadly, lost the trust of the public, has lost the trust of most of the parliamentary party, and many of us feel let down.
The facts are undeniable. He can't command the confidence of people, sufficient numbers of people to serve in his government.
And I'm Rebecca Jones. Law officials recommend that taking a photo down a woman's top without her consent, known as down-blousing, should be made illegal in England and Wales. In the US, prosecutors say the man charged with killing 7 people at an Independence Day parade in Chicago has confessed to the mass shooting.
Welcome to BBC News. Geeta Guru-Murthy here, live at Downing Street in the coming hours for you. The press are gathered here on another momentous day in British politics as we await to see the fate and the future of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, as his whole party, it seems, is ranged against him. In the last few minutes, we have learned that Nadhim Zahawi, a long-standing ally who was only yesterday appointed as Chancellor after Rishi Sunak had resigned, has now issued a public call for the Prime Minister to step down. Let me just read you a bit of what Nadhim Zahawi has said. He said, "My number one priority has and always will be this great country. When asked to become Chancellor, I did it out of loyalty, not to a man, but loyalty to this country and all it's given me. The challenge Britain faces, inflation or Putin's war, will not pause for anything, and it's vital that the major offices of state continue to function through a national crisis. If people have thought poorly for me for that decision, it is criticism I'm willing to shoulder. Yesterday, I made it clear to the Prime Minister, alongside my colleagues in Number 10, that there was only one direction where this is going, and that he should leave with dignity. Out of respect, and in the hopes that he would listen to an old friend of 30 years, I kept this council private. I'm heartbroken that he hasn't listened, and that he is now undermining the incredible achievements of this government at this late hour. No one will forget getting Brexit done, keeping a dangerous anti-Semite out of Number 10, our handling of COVID and our support for Ukraine in its hour of need. But the country deserves a government that is not only stable, but which acts with integrity. Prime Minister, you know in your heart what the right thing to do is, and go now." Nadhim Zahawi, who has perhaps been examined for his judgment and can see that it looks pretty contradictory because he agreed to step into the Chancellor's role, some saying that that was purely for his own political advantage because of a leadership race back as he's in a stronger position if he's in a big office of state, and yet now he's saying that he thinks that Boris Johnson should go. Michelle Donnellan, also who was appointed into education, has also said that she is resigning herself. We have seen, of course, increasing numbers of people stepping down today and throughout the last 24 hours. Suella Braverman, the Attorney General, is staying in her post as Attorney General, but has said that she thinks the Prime Minister to go, and she has called yesterday and repeating her call today for him to go, saying she would like to put herself forward for the leadership race when it starts. We are now hearing from Chris Mason, our political editor, that Boris Johnson will resign. So Chris Mason, our political editor, saying Boris Johnson is going to resign here from Downing Street. We will expect to confirm that as fast as we can. And of course, Chris Mason must have obviously heard that from his sources. But of course, the writing's been on the wall really since we heard the details of the case, Chris Pincher's case, and the contradictions in the Prime Minister's story from a senior official in the Foreign Office. We've seen the huge number of internal Conservative protests, and even this morning seeing that those appointed yesterday, trying to still shore up the Prime Minister, have still called for him to go. And it does look now like Boris Johnson is at last going to step down. There were fears of his behaviour resembling that of Donald Trump, a constitutional crisis, if he didn't accept that he didn't have enough ministers to form a government, enough ministers to fill in behind all the people that were clearly stepping down. He's lost the confidence of all wings of the Conservative Party, both those who backed Brexit and those who didn't, at all rungs of government, junior ministers, cabinet ministers, backbench Tory MPs. We've seen the vote of confidence, of course, also in the last few weeks, the threat of another vote of confidence that he would now potentially, of course, have lost. So that tipping point clearly had come for the Prime Minister. It was a question really of when and not if. But of course, we will wait to see what Downing Street officially say on camera. We are hearing, though, now from Chris Mason, the BBC's political editor, that Boris Johnson is going to resign as Prime Minister. Of course, he has delivered Brexit. That is going to be his biggest legacy to this country, whether you support it or not. The arguments will rage. And the question now is, of course, how damaging has this whole saga been to the Conservative Party? There will now be, it's presumed, a big number of candidates to take this country forward in the Conservative Party. We are hearing that Boris Johnson is going to step down, but stay on as caretaker leader into the autumn. That is according to Chris Mason, BBC's political editor, who's saying that, yes, the Prime Minister will stay on. We expect that any Conservative race will last through the summer, and therefore the Prime Minister says that he will stay in office until that presumably is concluded. Nick Eardley is here. Nick, just tell us more about what we're hearing.
Yeah, Geeta, in the last few minutes, some confirmation that the Prime Minister has agreed to stand down as Conservative Party leader. He will stay in office, he hopes, until the autumn, and then there will be a new Tory leader elected over the next few weeks. The events of this morning have been enough to tip Boris Johnson over the edge. Last night, his plan was to try and cling on, to try and reshuffle that place and get things into a place where he could continue. The resignations this morning have been enough to push him over the edge.
And people will say, haven't some of his supporters, like Michelle Donnellan and Nadhim Zahawi, been really acting like headless chickens? How can you support the Prime Minister one day and then say, actually, privately, you were saying something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, look,
it's very damaging to the whole Conservative leadership, isn't it?
It's a very fair question. It's a question that Tory MPs were asking me first thing this morning. How on earth can you be in a position where ministers are appointed one day, resigning the next? To be honest, I think this was inevitable from, if not Tuesday, certainly yesterday. Boris Johnson's power had absolutely sapped within his party in Parliament yesterday, and now he's been dragged into this position, and we expect he will announce today formally that he is going to resign.
Do we have any guidance as to whether he is going to come out and do a public statement here? There's obviously huge numbers of journalists here.
That I would expect him to come out and say something, yes. No confirmation of that yet, but I suspect he'll want to say.
And of course, this is what people have been calling for. There had been fears, hadn't there, that he might try to trigger a general election. That's what he threatened so many of his MPs with. Fears that really this was dragging us into constitutional crisis territory. Heard some very key voices, people like Gus O'Donnell, former senior head of the civil service here, saying, really, we've got to be very, very careful. We don't have a written constitution here, but the whole point is the Prime Minister can only govern if he has the full support of the Conservative Party and therefore the support of Parliament. And it was clear with all the resignations that the Prime Minister had lost that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Geeta. The idea of a general election, my understanding is Boris Johnson was told that that'd be impossible. It would put the Queen in a difficult position. He's obviously decided not to do that. To be honest, I think if he had tried to do it, there would have been enough of a mutiny in his party to stop it happening. It was so obvious yesterday in Parliament. Just everywhere you turned, there were Tory MPs saying the game is up. The thing that seems to have pushed the Prime Minister over the edge this morning is that message from Nadhim Zahawi, Chancellor, for just over a day, saying that the game was up. Michelle Donlan, Education Secretary, for just over a day, resigning to tell the Prime Minister that the game was up. He had no authority left. There wasn't a functioning government. He's been forced out. He'll confirm that soon.
Nick, I mean, in terms of Boris Johnson as a Prime Minister, just to look at his record to date, he came into power in an extraordinary set of circumstances, with all the deep divisions and ructions of Brexit. He is leaving office also under extraordinary circumstances. People questioning even his sort of mental stability at this point, because he was apparently unable to see what the whole country could see, which is his position was untenable.
I think some Conservative MPs would question whether there was a sense of denial in there last night. It does leave this extraordinary situation where the country is facing a cost of living crisis, real questions over what the government can do to help the most vulnerable households, real questions over the war in Ukraine and the support that the government here is giving to the Ukrainian regime to fight Russia, real questions over the constitution with the Scottish government demanding another referendum on independence, real questions over Northern Ireland and the protocol, that legislation going through Parliament just now. There is a lot on the table. There's a lot that needs to be done. I suspect one of the reasons Boris Johnson wants to stay Prime Minister until the autumn is to try and sort some of those issues out, to try and have a swan song where he says, there are things I want to deliver before I go.
Do you think that the public will accept him even staying on till then, given those incredible challenges? I mean, you know, there's still potentially unpredictable international circumstances that the UK has to play a big part in. Of course, Ukraine notably is one of them. Do people think he's got the judgment and the wisdom and the calmness of head to stay in office even for the coming weeks?
Look, I think the key question is whether his MPs think that, and whether Tory MPs who will be turning on now to find out that the Prime Minister is going to resign imminently and announce his departure timetable imminently, they will be questioning amongst themselves this morning, do they need to do something quicker? Do they keep Boris Johnson until the autumn, and do they let a leadership election play out? The other thing, Geeta, over the next few hours is I suspect there will be a lot of people declare they want to be Conservative Party leader. There are a lot of names in the hat here. There are different factions of the party who are going to fight for the leadership, and some are predicting to me this morning that it's going to be a bloody battle. It really could divide the Conservative Party.
And that won't just be Brexit Remain. That division is still, of course, deep within the party. It's a question of how far that is still present as a factor. We know, of course, all the key names that have been running, but just spell out some of them. And for example, Nadhim Zahawi, who in one of the papers has apparently had the backing of a key strategist, Linton Crosby. We can't confirm that, but that's what's being reported. How much damage has he done to himself with the last 24 hours of sort of toing and froing?
Quite a lot to some MPs. Yesterday we heard a lot of them saying that. I've had messages this morning from people who were in government until recently saying that Nadhim Zahawi basically gave the Prime Minister the kiss of life for 24 hours. So I think he's going to find that many Tory MPs don't want him to be leader. Not impossible that some decide he should be and that he will stand. Some other names that I suspect will put their their names forward. Jeremy Hunt, the former Foreign Secretary, Tom Tugendhat, who's currently a Select Committee chair, potentially Rishi Sunak, potentially Sajid Javid, Steve Baker, the leading Brexiteer, is expected to put his hat into the ring as well. I think by the end of today we'll have quite a lot of people declaring that they want to succeed Boris Johnson. He plans to stay until the autumn. In the next few minutes he's going to announce that he is resigning. The question now is who takes over. We're just watching now in the street actually his family coming out, senior ministers, his wife Carrie carrying one of their children coming out into Downing Street as well. On both sides actually where we're sitting there are ministerial teams out to see the Prime Minister's final words.
Yes, let's come back into Downing Street and let's look at the crowd outside the number 11 because we have Carrie Johnson and we have the little baby and we have Nadine Dorries, who is of course one of the Prime Minister's most loyal and enthusiastic colleagues. So all of them, Nick, now here to witness what is for them surely a moment that they didn't think they'd be witnessing at this relatively early stage in a Prime Minister's career.
It's remarkable to think that it's only been 2.5 years since Boris Johnson won that incredible majority which gave him the chance
Well, here
to
he
govern.
is, Nick. Let's see what the Prime Minister has to say.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate. The biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much and when we have such a vast mandate and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British Civil Service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
The statement by Boris Johnson announcing that he is to resign as Conservative Party leader and eventually as Prime Minister. Nick Eardley, our political correspondent, listening to that with me, and just wondering, Nick, what you made of the statement itself, and did it tell us anything new?
Boris Johnson is going to try and stay on until a new Conservative leader is found. We know that many in his party don't want that to happen, but that's certainly his intention. After that speech, there was a certain tone of defiance, I thought, in there, talking about the Conservative Party moving and talking about the herd. When the herd moves, it moves, was the phrase that he used. I think a sign there that he will say that this was about the Conservative Party rather than the country turning his back on him. We know that for the past 48 hours he's been making the argument privately and his allies publicly that he could still win an election, that he thinks he still has the backing of enough of the public to go on. So he is blaming the Conservative Party in essence. You heard him say that he's disappointed to be giving up this job. Clearly, he's extremely reluctant to be doing this. He's been forced from office by what happened over the last couple of days. But a couple of things in particular that he wanted to talk about there, which Boris Johnson hopes he will be remembered for. One is the support for Ukraine, that close relationship he's built with President Zelensky, those visits we've seen over the last few weeks that he thinks show him on the international stage. He wants to be remembered for that. And that phrase, levelling up, that was a Boris Johnsonism. That's something that he is proud of and clearly wants us all to remember him for. But you could tell there the melancholy in that tone. Boris Johnson is not a happy man to be moving on.
Them's the breaks is what he said, yes?
Yeah,
Them's the breaks. I wonder whether that's the kind of relaxed attitude to the way this has developed that is properly reflective of what's going on behind the scenes. But it's a phrase I suspect that he'll be remembered for delivering there. And talks then about the Darwinian system, as he put it, of electing a new leader. Was that really the kind of assertive, confident statement about what he's achieved that you were expecting, or was it a more understated, a more subdued Boris Johnson in the circumstances? More coming up for you on BBC News at 1, so stay with us, we'll have more, and I'll be talking to our political editor Chris Mason too for the latest on this leadership crisis. Today at 1, Boris Johnson has resigned as Conservative leader. He says he wants to stay on as Prime Minister until the autumn, while a successor is chosen. The announcement came after more senior resignations and declarations of no confidence from MPs and others this morning.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
Now, this lunchtime, the Prime Minister has appointed a new cabinet, but Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has said that he must step down right away, or Labour will try to bring a vote of no confidence in Parliament.
He needs to go completely. None of this nonsense about clinging on for a few months. He's inflicted lies, fraud and chaos in the country.
Sir Keir Starmer. We'll have all the latest reaction from here in Westminster and around the UK, as well as from our correspondents and indeed from some of the voters too. So stay with us. Very good afternoon from Westminster and from Downing Street, and welcome to BBC News at 1. So, Boris Johnson has resigned as leader of the Conservative Party. He was saying last night that he would want to stay in office, but more cabinet level and other resignations piled on the pressure, and around 9 o'clock this morning the BBC learned that he would be stepping down as leader, but not as Prime Minister, not yet anyway. He wants to stay in office until the autumn, until a successor has been chosen. Now, within the past half hour or so, the Prime Minister has made that formal statement here in Downing Street outside the famous door of number 10. So before we get the latest on the reaction and talk to our political editor Chris Mason, who will be joining us, let's hear what the Prime Minister said.